So in part one, we started turning a crusty old bit of scrap timber into something half decent. And surprise, surprise, underneath all that mess was some beautiful heart reaming. Now, a sensible person would have made a nice rectangular jewellery box. But no, my brain said let's make this unnecessarily complicated. So after some mass meltdown, because we all know geometry and emotional damage go hand in hand, with a few jigs and a near existential crisis, I ended up with a hexagonal box, complete with drawers. Because why not? Fast forward through a bit of rot, a hidden nail that murdered my bandsaw blade, and me seriously considering a new Olympic sport, timber tossing.
Let's shop shit.
And somehow, I now have a hexagonal shell. So in this video, we're carrying on with the job. Drawers, shelves, dividers, the works, as I continue to make things way harder than they need to be. Voila! Look at that! So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to cut that in half because I want to make two separate shelves. I'm thinking for earrings in here, and then they'll have a top piece that'll come off, and then we can make the rest of the sections for the bottom once we do that. So that's the first thing, we'll cut that in half. It's always a bit tricky cutting these sort of things in half. What I do here is I don't actually saw through the whole of the case. There's probably about 1/4 mil left in the case here, and I'll saw all the sides. This stops it from collapsing when you saw it, and keeps it all nice and even. And then once I've put this saw through it, it's quite easy with the little saw just to cut off the little excess that's left. And then from there we'll just use the little hand plane and we'll clean up the edge. And then of course the last trick to make sure these surfaces are perfectly flat and matching is I'll just take it to the granite top with the sandpaper and just flatten off that bottom edge. And by working through that process you make a very flat surface and they match up really nicely. Alright, so we need to make a bottom for the top case here. So I've got a piece of the reamer here which I've planed down to about 2 mil, so nice and thin. Now I'm just going to glue this directly to the bottom, so I'll mark out the shape roughly, and then we'll cut off the excess on the outside. I'll probably left about 1 mil on the outside of this, and then we'll glue this directly to the bottom of the case, the top case. So we'll let that dry. While that's drying, I want to make a couple of little jigs so we can cut thin strips of timber with. Very hard to do that sort of thing on a drop saw. Well, hard and very dangerous. So I'm making these quick little jigs up. You can see this one's got some beveled angles on the end, and the other one is a square one, which will cut a 90 degrees. You see me cutting the 90 degree there. And then I want to make a stop, which is just a bolt recessed into the bottom. I'm working on the adjustable stop now. This will go in the track, and then you can see the nut and the washer there that'll lock it into place. This means I can cut strips into the same lengths multiple times. These are great little jigs. They work really well for the job, especially when you're cutting really thin little strips. Our little box is dry, so we can clean up the edges. That's a quick job with a little block paint, and from there we've got to work on the bottom base. So that's the sides, because what I want to do is this top one will drop into those little slots there that I'm making. So I've started gluing on these little sides here. So I'll trim them off, and the next thing I want to do is fit these. So you can see this first jig, really, it just cuts them square and then at a certain length. Now this next jig, you can see I've set an angle on one end, it's 60 degrees. This allows me to put the little piece in there and actually trim a 60-degree angle on the end of it. The 60 degrees is half of the 120 degrees, which is the side of a hexagonal box. So what this should mean is once I've cut it to length, put another 60 degree on the other edge, that this should just slot in. At this stage I hadn't put a stop in this jig. I was just using pressure from my finger to do it, but I figured out pretty quick that a stop would be handy on this, so we put one in and it worked a lot better. But you can see how it works. I just gradually work the timber off with a chisel. As always, don't try and take a big chunk off at once. Just gradually work the edges off and then you'll get a nice clean edge. Of course, using a sharp chisel. But you can see there's a nice 60-degree edge there, and if I've done this right, it should slot on.
Nice. Let's glue that in.
With the jigs it works out really good, because once you've have the distances set, you've got a process here. You cut them to length. You can see there I've put the adjustment, length adjustment on this jig, so to stop the piece from moving. I'll lock that in place, and it's a quick process to just keep working these pieces up and slotting them in.
Nice. Alright. Next thing is we've got the dividers for that.
This was the first brain teaser. I was thinking about just running the dividers so they all cross in the middle, but that would be very, very difficult. So what I've done here, you can see, is I've made a little hexagonal rod. I'll cut a little piece off this, and then we'll drill a hole in the middle of this, and then we'll actually screw it into the middle of the hexagonal. And then I can use that as the center point to attach the little separators to. Little mental note there, not to drill into the cloth underneath the whatever you're drilling. So just using a little brass screw, we attach it to the box, and then I spent a little bit of time making sure it was in alignment with the rest of the hexagonal. Now to make the sections, I plane an edge square, cut a length off, and then we'll replane the edge square using a little shooting board, and there's our segmated pieces. So the first thing I want to do is we want to make a little bevel in one end so it slots onto that centerpiece. So this is how I decided to do it. I split the little piece in half, clamp it into the 60-degree jig, and then we'll, using the chisel, you see, we'll gradually work up to that halfway line. Once we get to that point, we'll then just flip this around and then chisel from the other side, and that should give us the degree, the 120 degree, which is equal to the hexagonal, and that should fit into that centerpiece. Now yes, this looks as fiddly as it is. It is a tiny little piece that you're trying to cut these valleys into. Now I could have rotated the centerpiece around so that it had a flat side facing the corner, but I just thought that didn't look right. The hexagonal in the middle had to match the hexagonal to the outside, and those hexagonals are going to match the hexagonal of the box. So that's why we're spending a bit of time cutting these tiny little channels. You see here I've got it all nicely finished, and that'll fit into the centerpiece. And then we'll cut a point, same process, but we're cutting a point, 120 degree point, and then if we get this right, it should just slot in, just like that. And now we can we just proceed doing each little piece, and you can see they all slot into place. The jigs were really good for this, because once they were set up to the lengths, I could then quite easily get the pieces together. You can see some of them I came back and just took whiskers off them just to gradually work up to the fit. So I may have gone back 2 or 3 times to the jig to trim little pieces off, because it's not a perfect perfect size in the hexagonal. Each piece is fractionally different, but what the jig allowed me to do is go back and forth and get the fit just right. Now the fit wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close, and I was quite happy with it. I wanted to give a little bit of decoration onto the middle centerpiece as well. So you can see here I've just worked my way around with the carving knife just to give it a bit of a bevel. And once I get this pretty close and is happy with the shape and size, I'll just take a little bit of sandpaper. This is what I call the salt and pepper of the job, just giving it a bit of seasoning, woodworking seasoning. And you can see it just tidies that end up really nicely. And from there we can glue it all together. And while that dries, we can work on the bottom case, and that's pretty much a press and repeat. Same thing, cut a whole lot of sections to length, plane the edges square, and then start cutting the bevels and the points into each end and slotting them in. This one's a little bit more tricky because we've got to get the balance right with all of them, but once we'd got them all the right length and fitting nicely, we were able to glue all that into place as well. And with this last piece going in, that's the segmented sections done and the 2 little centerpieces done. So now we're going to move on to the drawers.
Alright, I've got an idea. This is the drawer front. That'll go in there. Now I initially thought that we'd just do a pull drawer, but then someone suggested that we do a arcing drawer like that. Alright, which I think we can do. It'll just mean that we'll have to put a hinge here like that, so that then that can hinge off that point, and then the drawer can come out like that. That's what I'm thinking. So that'll be the backing of the drawer. So we'll make that, and then we can sort of semi-attach it to the front of that and see if it's going to work.
So this is a start of a very challenging nightmare. It's a perfect example of someone coming up with an idea you think's really cool, and boy, it become a real challenge and a nightmare. But in the end, it turned out pretty good. You see here, I'm working on the bottom and getting the basic shape right, and then we can still try and figure out if it's going to work.
Alright, so that'll be the drawer bottom. Well, that might just work, people. So that's the side going on there. And go on there like that, and then it'll hinge from that point. So that point will be here. We might need to make that a little bit smaller. That's a very small drawer, isn't it? It means it's going to be in there like that. That's not going to work, is it? I have to think about that.
So it took a while for my little monkey brain to work this out, but I had to adjust the pivot point to where the hinge is, not where the point of the case is. And once I'd figured that out, we were able to adjust the curve on the front here.
See if that works. Just clearing that edge, and then as it closes, I think that may just work. Look at that. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. Alright, I think that's going to work because of the pivot points off this point, not on the inside point. Alright, so now we've got to make a box for that shape there, so we've got to curve some pieces to make the wall. Alright, that's going to be fun. I think that's a laminate, so we've got to cut a whole lot of really thin pieces. So the first thing you're going to need to do when you're doing a glue laminate is a clamping block in the shape that you want to laminate together. So there's a bit of scrap 4x2 here, which we're cutting the curve into. This will be our clamping block. Once we've cut the curve into this, I'll then use the spoke shave and we'll just tidy up the sawn edges on this clamping block, and then that'll give us a clamping block. Next thing is we've got to make a couple of thin strips of timber. I think I planed these down to about 1 mil. Alright. Hoping they'll be thin enough to do the curve. Should be, I think. Put some glue on it and see what happens. Now, it may look like I'm going over the top with the glue on these, which I am, but I'm using the moisture out of the glue to soften up the boards a bit. By allowing the moisture to get into these boards makes them a little bit more flexible and able to bend into the shape I'm looking for. That might just bloody work. Okay, let that dry, see what happens. Now this is my first time attempting a glue lamination, so I was quite pleased how it turned out. Hence the surprise, but they did turn out really good, and the little pieces of wood seemed to bend in nicely and didn't crack or fracture, and I just proceeded now to clean them up. First thing is, of course, I flipped the block plane, my plane upside down. It's easier to take these curved bits to the plane than the plane to the curved bits because I can't clamp them, and then just proceeded to make a straight edge on one side, and then once we've done that, we'll then mark the width and cut them to the width. Now to glue these pieces on, what I did was I used a combination of super glue and normal wood glue. You can see the wood glue on here, and I'm putting a couple of spots of super glue on there. The super glue will fix it in place straight away and hold it there while the wood glue sets. You can see I put the front curve on, and now I'm putting the two sides in. The first side I'll hold into place. I'll put some accelerator on it to fix it into place. Now I'm checking the square. This is the front of the drawer, so we want this nice and square. Once we get it square, a little bit of super glue on the top here and fix this into place. This process worked really good. I was able to put the boxes together relatively easy without too much stress, and they came together really nice. Perfect. Good. All right. A quick clean up on the sander, and we've got a nice little drawer case. From there we can glue the front of the drawers on. A quick sand to adjust the fit, and we've got a drawer that slots into place. Now we've got to put a hinge on this drawer. now the fun really begins. The woodworker's treasure hunt. But I found the hinge. All's good.
As with putting any hinges in, the first job here is to mark it out. So half the depth of the hinge, and then the size of the hinge I mark in with a knife, and then we can use the chisel here to cut the pocket out. Now this process was relatively easy, fiddly but easy. You can see it's against the grain on the end, but it wasn't too bad. I just gradually worked my way down to the depth we needed, not trying to take too much off at one time is the secret. And of course a sharp chisel, and we get the pocket to the point we want. It's looking pretty good here, and then we check the fit with the hinge. Once we get this on, we can then transfer the hinge position to the main case and proceed with the main case to put the pocket in that for the other half of the hinge. Now this is where it became really challenging. The tiny little screws here had to get positioned exactly right. Of course, I didn't have a lot of space between the screw depth and bursting out the side of the box, which unfortunately I did do. And the other big challenge about this is the alignment of the hinge to the case. Any misalignment of this hinge meant the drawer didn't slot in nicely. I had to do this 2 or 3 times and fix up the screw holes, filling them up and re-drilling them, and I still couldn't get it right. So this is what I figured out. I put the hinge into the case. That bit of tape there is to stop super glue getting into the hinge, and then I put super glue on it. With a little packer on it, I was able to push the drawer onto the hinge and glue the hinge into place. This meant the hinge was in the perfect place for the drawer. Bit of accelerator to kick it off, and what this meant was that the drawer was set in place with the hinge. I was able to then gently take the drawer off, remove the rest of the screws that are in the case, and then re-screw it into the drawer. This worked out really good in the end, but like I said, it took me 2 or 3 goes to try and figure out this process.
Alright, that's the hinge on. Now we just screw it on.
Now I know the hinge is going into end grain, but I did put super glue into the timber to firm it up and give it as much strength as possible. But it should hold. They were pretty strong. And like I say, the main support for these boxes, it comes from the case and the drawer, not the hinge.
Not too bad.
And now the drawers are all together. This is the first time we put them together. Now, if you watch closely here, you can see my monkey brain slowly working out. We've got another serious problem to fix.
Something. Well, that's a fuck up. So, as you can see, there's the centre line in the box. There's one of our drawers. Of course, it's going past the centre line. Same with that one, going past the centre line. So how we're going to fix that is we'll just cut a chunk off that corner there. Poof. And then glue a little section on there, and that'll fix that problem.
So that's a perfect example of getting caught up in the details instead of looking at the bigger picture. It's not a complicated fix. This should work out pretty good. We'll just trim the ends off like I said. Put another little piece into there to make the wall, and then that should fix the problem.
That's that one, and that's that one, So we should be good now. Alright, let's put it together and have another look. We've got it. There you go. Boy, that took some effort. But there you go. So we're currently at this point. We've got all our components together now. We've got our inside of our box segmented. We've got our little separation piece here. That's all segmented, ready to go. So that can come out. That's all working really good. We've battled our way and we've got our two drawers, which look really cool. They'll work out lovely, and they are working nicely and fit relatively good. I can't say they're absolutely perfect. They've taken a lot of work and a lot of figuring out to get them to work. There's been some cock-ups while doing it. You know, I've drilled through the timber. Of course, I figured out that I'd made the drawers too big. But these things you learn as you go along. But they've come out pretty good. I'm relatively happy with them and how they work. So we've got to make handles for those. We've got to do all the segments and supports for rings and earrings and that sort of thing. I want to line the boxes as well. And most importantly, my biggest challenge, which I'm looking forward to the most, is I want to do a marquetry inlay into the top here. I want to use the double beveled marquetry inlaid process, and I'd like to put a design into the top here and just make it a little bit more special. So that's where we're at. I think the case is looking pretty good. Next thing is marquetry on the lid. That'll be in the next video. Thanks for getting this far. Please leave a comment or a question, or even a criticism or a critique. I'm always learning and I'm always interested in your feedback. Check out the video where I actually make the case. That's quite an interesting process as well. Alright, on to the next stage.